Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I once again have a guest. This is Jared Henderson. Say hi to my imaginary BookTube friends.
Hello, BookTube.
As with so many people on the broader YouTube ecosystem, Jared is suffering from severe health problem that requires him to hydrate every 15 seconds. I have not had a drink of any potable liquid of any kind in 15 years. But that comes with time. And we have a humdinger of a subject to talk about today. It's not the humdingerest of subjects. You're going to feel a little bit chapped, some of you, to know that we brooded around far better subjects, at least two juicier subjects, more clingy, more clickbaity, more YouTube-friendly subjects, and decided to shelve them in favor of boring old books. I'm hoping that at some point in the future, we will return to those subjects.
One day.
Give them the trot around the block they deserve. But today we're talking about genres. Today we're talking about the kinds of books you read. Not how much you read or why you read, but what you read. This is an interesting subject for me because in my experience, I don't want this to come off sounding snotty, but I guess on this channel, that horse has already left the barn, so I probably don't have to worry about it. But it'd been
give the people what they're paying for.
Yes. It's been my experience as a reader that I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way to say this, but the word that I have used my whole life is, I guess, now in the 21st century, not diplomatic. And that word is timid. My experience in my reading life has been that I have encountered almost only timid readers. People who only read in tiny little manicured gardens of prose and not outside of those gardens. And I'm wondering, first of all, I'm wondering if that's your experience as well. And second, I'm wondering if you would maybe characterize yourself that way.
Yeah, so I think most readers that I meet typically have a genre, maybe two. And often in those genres, they actually have subgenres that they really stick to. I've met many older men in my life who only read history books, and they'll always have a variant. They only read World War II history books, or they only read presidential biographies, something like that. And then I've met a lot of people who only read fantasy, only read science fiction, or when you combine the two, because they actually aren't two genres, they're the same. They're the same thing. I do firmly believe this, but I've met lots of those. When I was in academia, I would meet people who would read in their specialty and then would read maybe one or two types of literature. Or they would read whatever was being recommended as nonfiction on NPR at the time. That was a very kind of common way of picking your books. I personally have always considered myself a fairly broad reader. I read a lot of philosophy, though not as much these days, actually. I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy. I read literary fiction, I try to read a lot of classics. But also, I really love history. And I've been reading more of this. And I really like to read biographies. And, just various things. You could add a few more genres on there. Now, compared to you, Steve, I'm a very timid reader. Because I believe that you introduce yourself as saying that, the 10 or 15 genres that interest me often comes up when you talk about your
15 or 16.
15 or 16, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think I have 16. I don't even know if 16 genres exist. We'd have to.
Well, they do. If we count subgenres as genres,
yes.
if we count, I've heard people on YouTube give dodgy opinions on this, but of course, the only non-dodgy opinion is mine. There's fiction and there's nonfiction, and there are subdivisions of those. That's it. That's all. Yeah. It's either real or it's not, and subdivisions of those. But if we count those subdivisions as genres, then yeah, the number is up there.
And I think on the internet now, things have actually gotten weirder where, as with many things, where I'll meet people who are like, I only read fairy tale retellings, right? Which is a fine thing to read, I guess. I've never really been interested. Or Greek retellings of Greek mythology. And those are so, I want to almost call them the micro genre.
Oh, yeah.
Or something. Or I only read, such and such. And I've never been able to contain my reading like that. In fact, I don't read nearly as fast as you because I'm a human being. But I often am cycling through 3 or 4 books at any one time. I was telling you about a biography that I was reading earlier, and then I'm reading usually a fiction book, and now I'm starting this behemoth as this is my break. This is my fun reading lately as of this morning. I'm reading some comics, I do, and I sort of will just go through them and feel like it helps me read more. It makes me it's fun, right? It's just fun, which is one really good reason to read things.
The only really good reason to read things.
But so many people I know who are like, I only want to read or like epic fantasy, and it has to have at least 7 books in the series, or else I can't really get into the world or something. And I like a lot of those things, but I've just never been able to contain myself like that.
Why do you suppose that is? My theory about why people micro specialize like that has always been that it's a reaction to intimidation, hence my word timid, where they get a sense of the endless ocean of stuff that's out there, and the way they deal with that sense of that's an extremely uprooting, insecure sense. The way they deal with that is to master a tiny patch of ground.
Yeah.
Do you get that impression yourself, or do you think there's another reason why someone
related to that? I think that for a large number of readers, reading is a comfort thing for them. It's the place where they feel, maybe you might say, as I think people would be inclined to say, it's where they feel the safest, right? It's where they feel the most comfortable. And sticking with books they know, or very small micro genres where they feel very comfortable, is just like, that's just like a very happy place for them to be.
Stems from probably them first enjoying very much an example of that micro genre.
Exactly.
Know that I like this, so I'm going to stick with this.
Yeah. And I think maybe a fear of wasting your time too is another thing. Yeah. Which I've just gotten over that when it comes to reading, because even if you read a bad book, you learn maybe something else about what you don't like more, or you can see just how bad it is on the other side, and So I read lots of things anyway. Like
the only surefire way to avoid wasting time picking your next book is to have Steve do the picking for you.
Of course.
And a lot of people don't do that. They just don't do that. I have one person who's on like year 35 or 36 of doing that, without ever a bad experience reading, without ever an experience that doesn't just knock his socks off.
Yeah.
But most people don't. They prize their free will.
Yeah.
A big topic.
In fact, that reminds me, whenever you finally review that Milton Friedman biography that you unboxed a week or two ago, I want to know.
I'm not going to do it. Not because I don't read those things.
Yeah.
If you give me a big fat biography of somebody, I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
Unless it's just utterly incomprehensible to me. But the thing about a book like that is that I'm going to want to generate a knowledgeable review of it somehow, and I cannot do that. I would need to learn a lot more about economics to do that.
I actually love 20th century like political biographies, especially in the U.S., or sort of political history of the U.S. from maybe say like the 30s to like the 80s or something like this. So I'm very excited actually to read that Milton Friedman biography, and I like Jennifer. I think she's a good biography.
Somebody like David Murphy is going to know. He's going to bring a lot more to reviewing that book than I ever could. All I would do is be talking about it as a reading experience. He's
read Friedman. He's read the people that Friedman was responding to and influenced by,
which is going to be a part of that book. I mean, I'm assuming that a 1,000-page biography of Milton Friedman is only going to be bought by people who are interested in what he said.
Yeah.
So it's not the same thing. The reports that I could make on it would be its readability, the breadth of its bibliography, if it bothers to have one.
Yeah. Though Jennifer Burns wrote that Rand biography that I was talking about, that I was reading. I'll finish it today, actually. I have no interest actually in the thought of Ayn Rand, because I think she's a monster. But I found she was like very thorough with like archival work. She was digging into papers and letters in a really nice way, and she just like told a good story. It ends up being a compelling story, even if you despise the main character.
Yeah.
So,
in a space like that, if you were to line up, let's get 2 good reviewers who can write entertaining prose on their own. And one of them read that book and can tell you the bibliography seems extensive. It's in multiple languages. The narrative that the biographer keeps up is very entertaining. And that's it. And the other would be able to tell you in just as entertaining prose all about the bibliography, all about the narrative, and about Ayn Rand's writings.
Yeah.
The second one would be better.
Yeah, that's true.
It would be better because people, you don't, not because only specialists are going to read any kind of book, but because that kind of a thing, a big biography of Ayn Rand, is only going to be read by Randians. And they're going to want a knowledgeable assessment of the body of work, not just a knowledgeable assessment of the biography.
Yeah, I think I'm one of the few non-Randians who bothered to read the biography of Ayn Rand.
Well, I will do that with biographies. I just a month ago read a biography of Schumann or Schubert that it was full of musical analysis, only some of which I actually followed.
Yeah,
clearly meant for classical music wonks, which I am not. I'm a lifelong fan of it, but I'm not a wonk of its mechanics.
Yeah.
But getting back,
we've strayed. We've strayed. We need to.
As we will, as tends to happen when two dude bros start to talk. Imagine what we could talk about the discarded subjects. Oh my! I had Steve yearns to talk about them, but
both heavily bearded and pantsless.
But I'm wondering. I'm wondering when it comes to this. So I guess I'm looking for papal dispensation to continue using my term timid.
Yeah.
I mean, people, they aren't doing it because they don't think there's any other kind of writing out there. They're doing it specifically because they know there is other kinds of writing out there. And they don't want to feel like a newcomer. They don't want to be learning a language from the ground up. They don't want to waste their time.
No. Now, I think we need to make an important distinction here between readers in general and then the particular kind of weirdos who decide to turn on a camera and talk about books on YouTube, of which I am one, right? And I say the weirdo thing with a lot of affection.
You are one, yes. Although, on your main channel, it's just 2 books, which is a pretty easy list to get through, which explains why 90,000 of your viewers have actually read the books you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's just 2 books. If you're 18, you can cover that.
Yeah. So the kind of person who would go onto YouTube, also, I think a lot of people just decide they're going to specialize in something. And that they're going to just say, here's what I talk about, right? I even talk to bigger booktubers sometimes who are like, look, I read more than fantasy, but I have an audience that wants to talk about fantasy and I make fantasy videos. And like, that's just what I do on YouTube, but I read more than that. And actually, there's a lot of stuff that I read that would never make it onto my YouTube channel. Just also in part because that's like for my own sanity to keep something private or to keep something like sort of personal and not put it all out there. But I know a foreign concept in this chat, but
I was raised and socialized by people who sniff each other's crotches to say hello. You don't have a concept of privacy.
So we basically have this the kinds of people on YouTube who would maybe stick to a genre out of a sense of making content, or that's the conversation they're already a part of. And if you get really into like those fantasy is probably the biggest one of this, where people will start recommending more and more series to you. And then you say, oh, well, I'll never have time to read all of the fantasy series that I want to read. And I'll certainly never have time to read them if I read anything else.
Right.
And so in a sense,
that's why my eyebrows did their little dance when you mentioned this, because I mean, your own experience, of course, is paramount here. But my own impression from people who hint or imply on their specialist channel, whatever the specialty is, that it's not the only thing they read. My impression is always that they're lying, and that it is, in fact, the only thing they read. Because how could it not be?
Yeah.
If you are a normal person, you go to a job, you have classes, you have school, you have loved ones and family and commitments and whatnot, and at the end of the month, you're saying you read 15 books, and you're showing me 15 fantasy novels, each one of which tops the scales at 600 pages. I'm not particularly going to believe that you read anything else. I'm not thinking that you strayed to Kant or Darwin when you weren't on camera.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's just an uncharitable view of things. It just doesn't seem.
I mean, I think you're more inclined to think that they're lying than I am. I think that's been a theme in a lot of your videos. But I also think that maybe...
How many ways can Jared imply South Boston without actually saying it?
This is a very distinct, like you're from Southie and I'm from Ohio. So
Oh my. Okay. Yeah, that
You're
is
from the one neighborhood in Boston that still has a Boston accent, but and I'm from a place where it's impolite to not hold the door for 15 minutes. So it's a very different way of life. Um, I'm inclined to think that a lot of them, if they are reading more, for some of the stuff they want to talk about on their channels, I think they're listening to audiobooks, and I think they're listening to them very quickly. I think this is
yeah.
the strategy. I think they're listening at 2x to
But the
audiobooks.
subject doesn't completely pass you by, right? You would never in a million years read a romance novel. When's the
No,
last
probably not.
time? Is it immeasurable by years? When is the last time in months or weeks or years that you read a mystery novel?
Yeah, you're right. So there are many genres that. So even me, as someone who considers myself a fairly wide reader, there are just genres that it's not even that I'm against them, though I admit to having kind of a prejudice against romance novels that is probably irrational and unfounded. I just don't ever. I just I don't know. Maybe I associate them with like my grandmother, like or something. But there are other genres that it just never occurs to me. Um, and mystery novels would be one of these. I think I read a Poirot novel like 5 years ago. you know, uh, but like that was it, right? Like those are it. There are just genres that aren't even in my mind. They
Just
don't
not at
even.
all.
Yeah,
Just not
exactly.
at all.
Exactly. That's
Wow.
another one with this is that I don't read a lot of like I don't know if this is a pejorative term, so please correct me if it is, like popular science books or sort of science, like popular nonfiction that's written like about science stuff. So you read a fair
Well,
amount of this.
okay. No, it's not pejorative,
Yeah.
it's also not necessary, right? Because you don't read specialist science books either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't read science,
You don't read science
special
at
science.
all,
No.
right?
No. I
If
probably
you
don't read
did,
any
you would
science.
read
Yeah.
popular science.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah. 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 That's the right way to put this.
So that's
So
another one
I'm.
that we just
Yeah.
rule out.
Yeah. 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 Or I'm not even looking at their new releases. That's another part of it, right? I in sort of our algorithmic environment, if like a new political biography from the right time period in American politics pops up, I'm going to know about it, right? I found out about that Friedman biography, which kind of like fit in with other purchases I'd made. But a book about the birds of Yellowstone or something just doesn't come up here. One of the reasons actually that I like watching your mail hauls is one, big fan of those Steve rants. I wish they would come back or more. You should put those on your Patreon. That's going to drive people.
I had a doozy just the other day. It's put me off mail halls all
Yeah.
over again. I had an enormous doozy just the other day that went on forever and ever until my eyes were up in my head and there was
Yeah.
foam on my lips. Suddenly I thought, where am I? Oh, right, I'm making a video and just had to stop right in the
Yeah.
middle. Just
Yeah.
not gonna upload that.
So I watch some of your mail hauls because I'm just going to hear about a book that I would just never hear about. A science fiction release, I'm going to probably hear about it through my network of friends or fellow content creators or just the algorithm or something like this. The idea though of like, a science book, or as one we mentioned here, historical fiction, a genre that I very rarely read.
So is
Um,
science the same as mystery or romance, where not only do you not read it, but you don't even think about it? There's not even a pull of interest, or is it different?
mm, it's a little bit different. I feel like I would have to find the right topic, or occasionally I want to like seek out something. I actually read a history of I read like a combined history of astrology and astronomy. And the idea was like sort of charting how astrology became a respectable science eventually when it became astronomy and it dropped all the prediction stuff. And like that would count as like reading like a sort of history of science book. And that was very good. That was very interesting to me. So some topics would draw me to it. But if someone were like, here's a murder mystery novel, I would just say, I hope you enjoy it. But
So what others? What you said, you mentioned history and biography you do read and you are curious in you read, of course, bro philosophy, and you read the classics and science
yeah,
fiction.
I would say I also don't just read bro philosophy. I read lots of philosophy that people on YouTube don't want to talk about either because it's too academic.
It's all bro philosophy.
Of course, of course. Let me just
It
look
doesn't
quickly.
matter how thick the tweed is. You cannot think the universe into belonging to you. You cannot cogitate the universe into being an employee of yours. You cannot do it. No matter
Well,
how thick the tweet is, no
don't
matter how
worry.
cozy the environment.
You say that, but I'm going to keep trying. You know, we'll see who has the last laugh. Yeah, you know, let's see. I have just like looking through here on my Kindle some recent books that I plan on reading. A lot of science fiction. The
Okay,
Katz translation of the Brothers Karamazov. The
comes well
3-volume Edmund
recommended.
Morris Theodore Roosevelt biographies, which I've been meaning to get to at some point. And then I have some more philosophy. Oh, a book I just recently read, Cat Country by Lao She. Very early, weird Chinese science fiction that I probably would not recommend anyone read for fun, but was like worth an afternoon.
In some of the
Yeah,
sub, are you micro specializing in some of the subgenres? When you say science fiction or fantasy, do you have types of science fiction or fantasy that don't interest you, that you absolutely won't read?
probably. Well, I admit to being a little skeptical of what gets called modern fantasy or modern science fiction, and that something has to usually prove itself to me. Like they're pretty good. I'm not following new releases nearly as much, or like Hugo and Nebula winners these days. Just because I found more and more. I actually usually like something. I usually like at least a few books that get nominated for the Hugo or Nebula. I just very rarely like the book that wins. I've just found that that's just never going to scratch my itch. But for instance, I don't read like a lot of sword and sorcery, but no one reads a lot of sword and sorcery anymore unless your name is Michael K. Vaughan.
Or Liam at Liam's Lyceum.
Yeah. Yes. So
he even writes it.
So, you know, there's a little bit more of that stuff. I probably read, you know, the latest science fiction series that I became very interested in was Sun Eater by Christopher Rocchio, which is much more like space opera, science fantasy kind of stuff. And that really is really they're a big thing for me. Same with like, I love when you were doing your fantasy essentials, Book of the New Sun is sort of really high on my list. And I love that. So a lot of stuff that blurs the line between science fiction and fantasy that fails that, or let's put it this way, refuses to engage in the pretense that they are separate genres is maybe the way of putting it.
Have you read the Viraconian books?
I have not read the Viraconian books. So as soon as I saw those there, I was like, okay, cool. Those are going on the list.
Oh my, you're going to love them so much. Oh my. They are so wonderful. So beautifully done.
Or when you were saying about history, you know, what kind of history do I usually read? I mean, I'm really interested in, you know, as someone born in 1990, I know I look so much older, but I'm very interested actually in the 20th century because I feel like I just caught the tail end of it, and you know, the fact that like people would just casually talk about like the Berlin Wall falling or something really struck me as like I missed these world altering events. And I didn't really have one of those until 9/11, right? Or at least that's how I felt as a kid. Even from a sense of
9/11 as a kid.
Well, I mean, I remember it. Like I was 11 years old. And,
Okay.
and I was 11 years old, so I remember that day very vividly.
And you've had two since then.
Which ones
right?
are those?
The COVID-19 pandemic and an armed insurrection to overthrow your government.
Oh yeah,
which is something that most people in the world have never experienced, and
that's
where
true.
For 250 years, any American on the street would have said, no matter what happens here, it won't be that. So you can rack up as many experiences as you want, but it won't be an armed mob attacking the Capitol. And it did happen, and you lived through it. That and the pandemic.
Yeah.
That shut the whole world. So
and I very much
cities with streets empty in the middle of the day.
And I very much look forward to reading a good COVID-19 history in 50 years. You know, when someone can really go back very thoroughly, and we can do archive stuff or lots of FOIA requests. You know, just really dig into it like a good historian.
Yeah,
right?
all
rather than
some of the stuff is very good, but it's all very much first draft. And for the most depressing reason imaginable. It's first draft stuff, not because we don't have the perspective that 50 years of hindsight gives. It's first draft stuff because in 2023, we all know that gigantic organizations, including governments, have been openly lying. They've been intentionally lying and burying information. So they have to be first drafts not because we don't lack the perspective, but because we don't have the facts. The facts will only come out once people are dead, once governments have changed, once it doesn't matter anymore.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like when the Soviet Union fell and there was that brief period of time where Russia opened up the archives and a couple of historians could get in and do like some really good work.
Yeah.
And we're basically going to need something like that. Also, we all just collectively decided to lose our minds for a little while, and, and some of us are still putting the pieces back together. And so we need some people who had a little bit of time to like go hang out on a beach or something.
Yeah. Well, typically the yardstick is for a really good, reliable history is that it's written by someone who did not in any way live through the
Yeah.
events.
Yeah.
Oddly
So
enough.
I'm looking forward to like, in 50 years, there's that 40-year-old, or young historian who decides that they're going to like really dig into it for a dissertation or something like that. And then works on it for 5 more years and turns it into a great history book. I think that will be great.
Well, COVID was a genuinely deranging event.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were a normal
Absolutely.
person, you suddenly could not go outside. If you went outside, everyone was looking at you. If you went to your favorite place, it was closed or out of business.
My wife and I were actually essentially my wife and I essentially were trapped in separate states for about 4 months.
Yeah, that's a deranging experience. That when that happens to you, human beings react to that in weird ways. We're not even talking about the literally deranging stuff like being told you can't attend your grandmother's funeral, which you have to do it through Zoom or Skype. That's a genuinely psychologically scarring experience. That will have a long effect on you that you won't know. You won't know all of the effects. So
we need someone with hindsight.
Right. You need hindsight, and you also need, the NHS to not be lying. Or whatever. So that some news organization comes forward with a triply verified claim that government agencies knew X, Y, or Z when for 2 years, they said no. It's A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And at the time, otherwise.
Yeah. So
even
to go back to
even down to where it all comes from, right? Even down to why it started in the first place. From the very beginning, you have the lab leak hypothesis that has been batted all over the ping pong table. First, it was, well, this is something we should talk about, including Jon Stewart live as a comedy routine on TV. Then it was something, no, we absolutely cannot talk about it. Then it was something, well, I don't know, maybe the crackpots had a little of this, right? And then it was, well, people coming forward saying, yeah, I was paid to do gain of function research, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, with American money. So you don't, as a normal person, you were ping-ponging with that. You don't have any idea.
And it's hard. I think everyone involved, which is every single human being on the planet, has a lot of anger and resentment at their fellow human beings. Because we also had people who were just like completely unwilling to like even acknowledge that people would be scared for some reason, or completely
unwilling to acknowledge that people would be scared, and also unbelievably self-centered. How many thousands and millions of people in America alone said, well, I'm looking at this list of vulnerabilities and I don't have any of them, so I'm just not going to wear a mask anywhere, as if you are the only person alive in the world.
So we had, I think, so to kind of go back, a good history will eventually be written, and in a way that I will learn a lot, right? I'll be like, I lived through it and I have no idea what was going on, but a good historian will know, in a way that, the same way the people who were living in the Soviet Union can look back at some of these historians and go, that's what they were doing, because like we had no idea.
Or people 40 years ago or 30 years ago that lived through World War II.
Yeah, exactly. They just didn't know. They didn't know any of
the those people and ask them if they are in any way aware of fuel embargoes that FDR imposed on the Empire of Japan before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Ask them if they're aware of that at all, and if they aren't aware of it, and you describe it to them, then you ask them, okay, well, now that you know this, does that change what you think about Pearl Harbor at all in any way?
Yeah.
Yes, it's. So to get back to the subject, one concentration of history that you're talking about is relatively living history.
Yeah, there are still people alive who experienced it, but a lot of the historians who are writing about it were either pretty young or missed it, right? Or there. To use the example just that I keep going back to because it's the one I've been reading, the Burns documentary or a biography of Rand, which is really about how Rand kind of impacts American politics and changes sort of American intellectual life for about 10 years before fading into total obscurity. Burns wasn't around for that stuff.
No, right.
She's and so she can and that's useful. But yeah, that's a lot of the stuff. I'm interested in Cold War history again
Although
because
her
I feel
interest
like there's
hasn't
this
faded, right? Her interest
Burns
hasn't faded. Rand,
Burns'
Rand,
interest. Oh, Rand. Oh, there are still people who are very devoted to
the
her.
most
Yeah.
Randian individual you could conceive of is Donald Trump. So the influence hasn't faded at all. It's just the people who are living what we could call her philosophy have no idea who she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they did, the only thing that they would have to say about her is that she's maybe a 6.
Yeah. So,
I don't know why you engage in these conversations. You're always teetering on the edge of a Grandpa Simpson rant.
I
Must be
don't
very
know.
difficult for you to navigate.
I don't know. They're always fun, you know. I actually would dispute whether or not a certain former president is a Randian in the sense here, because I think actually it's one of these things. There's this famous line from Atlas Shrugged. I can't believe I'm going to quote it. It's like John Galt has people like swear this oath of allegiance, basically, but it's the allegiance to self. And it's like, I swear for the sake of my life that I will live my life for no man but myself, and I will never ask another man to do the same, or something like that. Or I will never. And it's that second clause where you would never ask anyone to be like totally devoted to you. Is the part I think. Trump. At the same time, though, Rand was essentially the leader of a cult of personality. Or
nobody ever gets to that second part. You're the only one who's ever read it, including her.
Yeah.
Nobody ever gets to that second part.
Honestly, the more I've dug into this stuff, the more I kind of think that she was leading a cult, like in the sense of a classic sense, like devoted inner circle, peripheral group that wants to get into the inner circle. Lots of weird terminology. You're not allowed to question the founder. There are schisms. There are excommunications. There's all of these classic features of a cult.
But okay, I had alternate discussion subjects in mind that were genuinely juicy, and you nixed them so that we could stay on topic. And what's the alternate topic you come up with? Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
Let's rest the conversation back to.
Are there any genres that you refuse to read then? Are there, or that you just would never
read? But there are some that I have zero, like you described, that I have zero interest in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the 4-second work week type thing, that or the self-improvement books that start off by telling you that you're the greatest person who's ever lived, unironically. It's telling you you are infinite, you are the greatest person who's ever lived. Here's the way for you to realize that. It's a 10-step program with the unspoken first step being to buy my book.
Of course.
Stuff like that. It's just fuel for egomaniacs. I know this is a little dicey for me to say, but there are way too many preening egomaniacs in the 21st century. We don't need any more of them. And these books are designed to make them.
What draws you, though, to the genres that you read? Because, for instance, one of the things that you read, like you read Tom Wright books, or as we call them in the States, N.T. Wright. I don't think I have. It's been years since I've read a Tom Wright book. You know,
what draws me to that is that it was one of my first loves in reading was biblical exegesis.
Interesting. Okay.
Which is very, very thin as an excuse for reading Tom Wright, because he isn't really doing exegesis anymore. I don't know that he ever has been. It's something else. It's, well, like I say, it's a combination of exegesis and homiletics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very much meant for the Sunday pulpit, not for a theology school, which is why theologians that I know tend to scoff.
Yeah.
It's one reason they tend to scoff is because he's burnishing things for a popular audience. And the other reason they tend to scoff is because his books sell, which you have to keep in mind. They will scoff at that if a book sells.
Yeah.
Like I had a college instructor once who twitted with me because I had included a reference in my bibliography to a book by Barbara Tuchman. And he said, well, you should take that out and find, a different source, find her source. I told him, well, I kind of like, it's not the source work. I like the way she puts it. Mm-hmm. As you can see in my bibliography, I have actually cited the books that she cites. But I quoted her because I like the way she puts it. And this guy, very stereotypical, sunken chest, sunken face, pale skin, as nearsighted as a mole, said, well, she wrote a bestseller, but anybody can do that. And there was a long pause where I was just staring at him, hoping that his little mind would put together the two pieces, which is that he had not done it.
Yeah.
He had not done it. He had soup stains on his shirt. And the reason that he was wearing it is because he only has 3 shirts.
Yeah.
You haven't done it, so it obviously isn't that easy.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's the reason why people don't like N.T. Wright, but I like him. Once I realized that he was striking, I mean, I've reviewed him negatively. I have reviews of some of his books that call him out for triviality, but I still read. I like his narrative voice, definitely. But why did you bring that up? Is it something that you would not do?
Reading a Tom Wright book. Well, it's
you
been a
do
while since
this on pro philosophy.
I do.
There you are parsing together original readings as much as you can, comparative translations, historical interpretations. You're doing all of that.
Yeah. I guess despite my religious affiliations, just have lost my taste for reading a lot of like biblical criticism or exegesis stuff. I mean, I read it occasionally. I went through a big phase of reading a lot of it. I tend to find the arguments really really flimsy in a lot of those books, in a way that often kind of frustrates me. So I just stop reading them.
When it comes to argument, I prefer exegesis that isn't making any arguments.
Yeah.
That's saying, isn't this interesting? Let's dig into why this writer is using this particular phrase.
Yeah.
I love that sort of thing. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Tom Wright doesn't do.
Yeah. So you know, I just wouldn't be strongly tempted to read those books, though. If like someone recommended me a particularly good one or something like that, I would be there. I think a lot of it, though, for me, is that I feel like the books that I'm reading, I sort of have some genres that I really do like. And one of the groups here, though, would be just reading like Western classics. And the problem is, though, that I haven't read enough of them, and there's a big list that I should still keep reading, right? And so part of it's just like, well, I kind of have this goal to read a lot of that stuff. And so I just need to kind of slightly prioritize what I'm going to read. I'm going to read.
Prioritizing brings me to another question about why people do this, or maybe why you do this. I would assume that another reason is just time.
Oh,
right? You have almost no time.
Yeah. So I can, I can maintain a pretty solid pace of about a book a week right now, especially with the baby, and who just insist on, being fed and things. And
you're a braver man than I am. That's for sure.
And so, and especially also if I want to write, which is something I'm really trying to focus on, how much reading can I then feasibly do, right? And so then I have to decide, all right, I only have this amount of reading that I'm going to be able to get done in a week. What are the books that matter the most to me? I mean, one of the reasons I'm reading this giant, big 1,000-page book on modern Chinese thought is in part because like it feels nuts to me that so many people, like China is a major world player, but its intellectual scene is almost completely detached from the the Western intellectual scene. There's very little engagement. There's very little understanding. And so it seems to me like we probably should just kind of understand how their intellectual class is thinking. In the same way that eventually people realize, like, this upstart American thing, maybe we need to start to sort of understand them or something.
Yes, and not even, I mean, that when you say we should probably understand their thought because they're a major world power, that sounds utilitarian, and that's true, but also just because it's there. It's interesting, even if they were tiny world powers.
That part's true. I just think increasingly there's going to be a larger influence where eventually more Western like scholars or thinkers are going to start more critically engaging with Chinese ideas, and I would just like to understand them, But also there is just this thing here where it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. Though my wife, who you may know is Chinese and grew up in China, she saw this book delivered, saw me opening it, and then said, "Why would you read this?" Like,
I have loved it. I have loved the very experience of being a complete newcomer. Excuse me. That very experience I have loved. I've learned to love that experience as uncomfortable as it is, because it's the only way. It's the only way to go to new places. You have to get through that experience to do anything new. If you hate that experience is terrible. Of being unmoored, of not having the first clue what you're talking about, that is a horrible experience. I don't deny that. But if you are so pathologically afraid of having that experience, you'll never learn a new language. You'll never start writing, and you'll never read outside your comfort zone.
Oh yeah, because
every page of that big book, I was saying, okay, I don't know who you are. I was
Yeah,
looking at the
yeah.
footnotes. I was saying, okay, I don't know who you are.
I'm gonna have to get
know.
my little sticky tabs out that I use to flag people or concepts that I don't know, and just it's gonna be this book's gonna be marked up. This is one reason I actually got a physical version of it, because I'm better at taking notes on physical versions, even though I'm mostly digital these days. Because this is going to be a book that it's going to actually I'm going to have to flag a lot of stuff.
I wish I could use those sticky notes. I can use them now because now I have a completely sane little dog who's every bit as intelligent as I am. She has a self-control, perspective, knows a good use of time from a bad use of time. It's absolutely weird. It's the first time in probably 40 years that this has been true. And certainly the only time where it's been the only dog in my life. And I am resisting the siren call to let that lower my guard. I cannot use sticky tabs because that has not been my experience with dogs, and they would just be eaten. They would just absolutely be eaten. But I've caught myself leaving my Kindle Oasis near the floor. I've caught myself stacking books on the floor just conveniently, just until I'm ready to open a shelf for them. You absolutely can't do that with dogs. But with this dog, I can. Because he walks by a stack of books and says, oh, it's a stack of books, so he's doing this because he's massaging the space on the shelf. Instead of Frida walking by a stack of books and urinating on them or pulling you off to eat them. But
my wife was pointing out that my habit of leaving my YouTube camera just sitting on a counter has to end very soon, because we only have he's 3.5 months old, but he's already trying to crawl. And so, given the next 3 months, he will be crawling, and then he's grabbing and he's pulling. So when you add these things together, very soon, my camera and stuff will be
yes. This is
an
the
endangered
nightmare
species.
scenario that I've heard from other young parents. They did exactly what you just did. They emphasized grabbing. So nothing can be left anywhere near where it can be grabbed.
Yes. You might notice that my beard is much shorter these days. And there is a reason for that, actually, which is that he can grab it and he can pull your hair. And, so you have to say, oh, okay. Let me just trim it down a little bit and not make it so appealing.
They don't start reading for years, do they?
No, but we read to him every night. And we alternate between two types of books with him. One of them are children's books, like a lot of Dr. Seuss or like sort of sing-songy stuff. And then to keep ourselves sane, we've been reading through Leaves of Grass, a couple of pages every other night, which he kind of looks baffled as we do it. But, it's a way he can hear words still. So that's good. He just needs to be exposed to language. And honestly, he's not looking at those pictures anyways right now, even though he can see stuff. He mostly is just moving his head, looking around, losing interest every 5 seconds. So we just read Leaves of Grass for ourselves.
You're a braver man than I am. Like I said, I have just enough patience to get a group of puppies to the point where they will understand what I'm telling them.
Yeah.
That's not long. That's not long at all. That's once they're weaned, that's about a month, 2 months for me, 3 months maybe. And then I can say, well, I told you X. You know what X is. Give me a good reason why you didn't do X. Before that, you don't do any of that with a puppy. But it's only a few months. It's not years. It's not years and years.
Yeah.
I mean, if little DEI is only a few weeks old, then when he's 6 years old, you still won't be able to talk to him about Edgar Rice Burroughs.
No. It's going to be a while. Though by the time he's 6, we already have a stack of books we plan on reading to him. So this is this can actually get us back to our main topic, right? Which is introducing him to a variety of genres, so that he can like, I mean, let's say, who knows, maybe he won't be a reader, but he'll at least be exposed to a wide variety of books that he can sort of find something that hooks him early on. I was probably going to be a fantasy and science fiction fan from a young age, because when my dad read me The Hobbit as a kid, I was just hooked. I was just totally hooked.
Oh, wow. Right from the beginning.
And then I loved reading the Chronicles of Narnia. I loved some of the Redwall books. So there was just a lot of like fantasy stuff early on.
What about Lloyd Alexander?
I never read Lloyd Alexander.
No. What about the Tripod books?
The Tripod books?
Tripod trilogy? Maybe these are before your time. They could be before your time.
Yeah.
Although Narnia is evergreen.
And then of course the thing that then hooks you around the right time for me was Harry Potter, because I'm like a millennial of a certain age, and it just like hit at the right time. So my thought though is that with him, with the kid, I just like wide variety of books, expose him to him. I have books I hope he loves, but one of the things that I keep telling myself is that I can't project my genre preferences onto him and then get disappointed when he doesn't share them. Because maybe this kid's just going to only want to read science books. And if that's great, if he does, that's fantastic. I would be so happy if or I need to make sure that I'm so happy. Would I be disappointed if he didn't want to read like fantasy novels with me? Maybe, but or probably, but I have to let him find his own genre preferences as well. The best thing I can do as a father is help expand his horizons.
So you were conditioned, so to speak, for fantasy early.
Probably.
And
it helps. My dad's a bit of a nerd, so that helps.
But nevertheless, you have experienced the feeling that I've talked about of branching out into something completely new, because you don't just read fantasy.
Yeah.
So what prompted that branching out? And do you still do it? I keep mentioning these subgenres that you don't read.
Yeah. So I would say like the 20th century American history stuff, that's only in the last couple of years.
Oh, okay.
That's a fairly new thing for me. It's getting to the point where I feel comfortable now when I'm reading them, because I'm like, oh, I understand these references and these events.
That's a big part.
I can read the book on like that latest Watergate book and say, I understand a lot of the big names here, and there are minor players that are being introduced or something. So that was one of them for me. Another part of you say is that as I try to read more classics, my range of classics has been kind of narrow, where I've read a decent amount of like the Greek stuff going into like the early Christian stuff. And then somewhere at like the 19th century, it picks back up for me or something. And there's been this big gap here, not counting philosophy stuff, because I've read more there at a much wider range. And so part of me is like, okay, what are those Victorian novels that I should have been reading, or what is like, I don't know, some 16th century thing that I'm supposed to care about, or at least that I should be trying to understand or trying to enjoy, and finding out what I like it there or what I don't.
Della Mirandola.
Yeah. So I'm still doing that to some extent, but I feel like it has to be a very conscious process for me, because it is easy to just fall into, especially when you have social reinforcement, where I know a lot of fantasy and science fiction booktubers who I would consider friends, who are like, have you read this? You would love this, and they're going to recommend fantasy and science fiction because they're fantasy and science fiction readers.
They're very insular.
A little bit, yeah.
Like you, but they're very insular. They don't play.
That's the weird thing, is actually that I'm not a fantasy and science fiction booktuber exclusively, right? I talk about a wide variety of things on my channel. And I seem to be okay talking to them, but I always admit to them, like, you guys are the specialists, right? You're the ones who talk about fantasy, and you talk about fantasy with each other all the time, which is wonderful. I talk about lots of things, and I talk to lots of people, but most of the time I actually just stare at a camera and tell the audience what to think.
Well, I do too, but I'm mainly yelling. Not so much. I don't have the quiet, soft-spoken background. I mainly yell at people what to think.
Yeah.
But they don't extend that kind of diplomatic olive branch to everybody. They don't extend it to me.
I was actually the one who reached out to like Philip Chase, for instance. I reached out to him because I wanted to email him about something. Here's one thing that I do as a creator that I don't think enough people do. If I like someone's YouTube stuff, I send them an email. I just say, hey, I think you're doing a good job. I really liked this video, something like this. If you ever want to talk, let me know. I did this with your stuff. I've done this with a lot of science fiction and fantasy people. I've done it with other people. Certain types of people are more likely to respond, but I email people to tell them if I like their content.
I always assumed it wasn't the lack of personal contact. It was that I occasionally used the word cloistered. Maybe they just don't like that.
you might be a bit of a bomb thrower when it comes to this, So,
but I'm cuddly.
Yeah. I like to think of you as having sort of mad scientist energy. But I think part of it is that I very explicitly reach out to people and say, this was really good stuff. Here's what I like about
But
it.
when it comes to experiencing those new genres or types of reading yourself, it's got to be get it done against a backdrop of time management, like you said,
Yeah.
right? Is so.
Yeah.
What if? I mean, you mentioned some book that told the history of astronomy, tracing it through astrology.
Mhm.
Every year, there are 2 or 3 big mainstream books about popular science works on astronomy. Would you ever be tempted to read one of those?
I'd have to have, it would have to have a really good hook for me, probably. It would have to be, or have a very, very strong recommendation from someone. But it's getting so hard to keep pushing myself. Again, I guess I'm becoming one of those more timid readers in that, like, there's so much I want to do. And also, as I become a more thorough and in-depth creator, like on YouTube, and I really want to kind of push myself to be making better content. You can start rolling your eyes whenever you'd feel whenever you'd like. You have my permission. But
Not
I
at
want to
all.
make,
I'm in
I
awe of
want to
it.
be, I want to be. I think some people kind of wince when I say this. I want to be like the best version of like my channel. Like I want my channel to be excellent and every single video to be excellent. And I don't feel like I'm hitting that with almost any of my videos currently. And I want them to be great. And I want them to be really well done with good ideas and really great execution. And I just feel like that involves a lot of research actually for the content I want to put out now, but it also involves just a lot of slogging through writing scripts or things like that. Those are the sorts of things that
You have
and they're
many
taking more
thousand
and more of my
viewers.
time.
Many thousands of your viewers would say that you're already doing a real good job.
They might, right? But I think this is the constant thing. Writers are like this too, but where you're the one who's going through your work over and over again to find what's wrong with it.
I've
Um,
heard this about writers. It seems really
yeah,
strange.
I I I am probably the person who watches my YouTube videos the most,
Oh, no
which
kidding.
which sound because
Oh, wow, that's
sometimes
fascinating.
sometimes I watch them and I take notes on where I messed up or like where
You're
I think
kidding me. That's
this could have been
incredible.
better. And this is part of it, yeah. And then I look at other and sometimes I watch a lot of YouTube and I watch other creators that I like who are doing stuff, often not on books, in other areas. And I'm like, why did I like this? Why did I never want to turn away for 8 minutes?
Right,
And I will take
right.
notes. Why was
Oh,
this the
my.
peak for me? Um, and so
That's fascinating.
there's this comics creator who I'm like obsessed with lately named Matt, but it's with 4 T's. It's just Matttt. He only has like 5 videos out. He has almost 100,000 subscribers, and some of his videos are like 5 million views. He did a great video on Rob Liefeld, the worst comic book artist in history, possibly. And it was called like how this terrible artist made millions. And he actually goes through the story of Rob Liefeld. He goes through actually some of the strengths of what Liefeld did and why people liked him so much, while not while also saying Rob Liefeld has a very weird sense of proportion and doesn't understand human anatomy and stuff like this. And I've watched the whole thing twice. I thought it was fast. And here's the thing: I've never read a Rob Liefeld comic because I thought they looked awful,
No,
right?
no,
And
what you're describing, that is fascinating. You're looking for technique, for thinking
exactly,
of the viewer, for thinking of
I
yourself, for presentation modes, regardless of subject matter. That is fascinating.
I mean, I
Oh,
would say
my.
like there is a craft to YouTube, right? In the same way that you paint the masters or whatever if you're trying to learn how to paint, just to understand the craft behind it, not just like, oh, I thought it was a great use of color. Like you do it, and I think that YouTube should be, or increasingly, my thought is this: YouTube is an art form, like the short video that gets a story across with information, like especially this kind of edutainment. There is an art to it. You have to practice your technique. You have to understand what works and what doesn't, not just to like succeed and blow up and go viral, but to make something that was worth someone's 12 minutes, that was worth someone's 20 minutes, or in the stuff I want to do eventually was worth someone's hour, like what kept them there the whole time.
Well,
And
we represent 2 different views of even how to do YouTube. You and I.
very, very different. Yeah.
I don't view
I
my videos as performances at all. And it's taken me a long time, a lot of bad, stupid left turns of my own to realize that seeing your videos as performances is not fake. Not
Yeah,
necessarily.
this
You
is
can be fake when you
this
do it. But there's a genuine way to do it. What you're describing is genuine, but it's
this is
certainly not
this is what
what I
I'm
do.
hoping.
Turn on the camera and just talk. It's not
This is something.
conversation.
So I would say this. It's genuine. There will always be a level of artifice to what I do in the sense that it is a presentation. It is a presentation that I am trying to script, that I work with someone to like make look visually cohesive. That is not as authentic as me just sitting there and just telling you what I think.
Right.
But what it is it's like I'm using this artifice in service of something that I really believe in. That to tell you
Right.
about something that I think is really
Well, and you're
valuable.
doing something different. You're making a production,
Yeah,
not having a
exactly.
conversation.
And like I could make a
Drastically different.
video, I could make 10 videos this afternoon about why I love Ursula K. Le Guin. I could just go through her books and I would talk about each one of them. Or I could work for 2 months reading, scripting, researching Le Guin and turn it into 8 minutes, and it could be the best 8 minutes on Le Guin that's ever been made. And that's what I want. That's like what I want to do.
Wow. Oh man, that is it's not the subject, but it's more fascinating than that is just naturally it'd be fascinating to me because we both do this every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is absolutely fascinating. That line that you have watched your videos more than anyone, that is fascinating, especially since, unlike perhaps if I had said it, I never for a moment suspected you of being egotistical.
Well,
I've
I
never
appreciate
watched. I only rewatch my videos when I think there's a problem. Otherwise, I don't.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because why would I? Why would I? Why would I go back and replay a talk that I had at a restaurant with friends in 1982? I wouldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But oh my, that is fascinating. So you're taking notes, and you're taking notes on other kinds of videos, not talking about literature at all.
Yeah.
Just
Because my
why
view
do I like this? What decisions is this person making? Does that
yeah.
extend even to
And
practical stuff like camera angles?
yeah. For instance, I noticed that some YouTubers like to set up 2 cameras to an A cam and a B cam to shoot different angles of themselves, but they're staying in the same place. And that actually is not visually interesting. They think it's visually interesting because they get to have cuts, but actually it looks lame. It looks really bad and it doesn't ever hook me. And I'm really trying to like think, how do I feel in this moment as I watch this? Like it's weird. I have to be very focused on them, but I have to be focused on myself too. And I'm like, that added nothing. If the camera moved a little, they have a camera operator who actually moves the camera slightly, significantly more visually interesting to me, even if they stay in the same place, because there's a sense of life to it. It's these kinds of things. I even watch the big like viral YouTubers like Mr. Beast or something, whose content I cannot stand. But the question is like, how did you get someone to watch 90% of that? Right. And my thought is most of it is manipulation there. Most
Oh
of
yeah,
it is actually, but that sometimes they will latch onto something that's really worthwhile. For instance, I think that Mr. Beast is a master of the first 10 seconds telling you what the video is about. You actually know what's going to happen. And so many YouTubers I really enjoy, a minute and a half into a 10-minute video, I don't know what they're going to talk about. And so for instance, just figuring out how do you do it, but then without turning into those manipulative techniques or stuff that's just cheesy, right? How do you do it there? But I'm looking at like, actually they're science communication YouTubers who are doing things like that. Veritasium is a very popular channel that does this stuff very, very, very well. People who talk about film.
Although he took a drubbing, and it was deserved. He took a drubbing on self-driving cars.
Oh, I didn't watch that one either. So I
watched his video and then watch the drubbing. A YouTuber made a video just analyzing his video. It wasn't ad hominem at all. It was just analyzing the claims, the jump cuts, everything, the information line by line.
Yeah.
It was devastating. Derek recovered from it really well. He has, when YouTubers get that big, a huge chunk of their audience is not going to leave them, no matter what.
Yeah. You have to be able to. Also, I watch some people who I don't have high estimations of, who I think are actually closer in style to what I'd like to do, and I figure out why I feel annoyed. I mean, I think that actually as someone who creates something, this actually was when I was a philosophy graduate school, this was a very big thing for me. I often felt like mad reading papers, and I would like stew in my anger for a while, and then I would realize that it was because like there was this mistake that had been made that I thought should have been obvious, right? And what I learned was to trust. This sounds evil almost. It's like learn to trust my sense of anger or a sense of annoyance, at least when I'm reading or something like this. So When I watch a Johnny Harris video, like, why do I feel annoyed by Johnny Harris, even if the subject matter is interesting? And
A friend of
there's
mine
stuff
used to
there.
refer to it as your brain stubbing its toe. He used to say, "Don't ever
Yeah.
ignore if your brain stubs its toe. That means something.
Yeah. So for
Not
instance,
just you being irrational."
he'll sometimes do these things where like there's clips coming in and there's voiceover, and there'll be like footage of him like slapping his face or like mussing up his hair or something like this. That is artificial. That's completely artificial. He did that. He made his hair look a certain way so that he could do that's the kind of stuff I never want to do, right? And it's just like going through and actually understanding what was it about it, something that you dislike. Writers do this too, right? They have to read books that they don't like sometimes to say, what went wrong here? Why, in a scene that I should have loved, why did I not care? And I think, yeah, sorry, I could probably talk about like the craft of YouTube for hours at this point, because I have become a little obsessed with
Oh,
it.
it's
And
fascinating.
I think it extends to my writing as well. It's a very different genre of writing as well when I'm writing a novel, working on this novel. But there's something too, like understanding how to dissect others' work to then implement it in your own. That's a skill I didn't actually have, I think, until I started taking YouTube seriously.
I want to stress that the novel was not Steve's idea.
I
Writing Steve champions, but in this
yes.
case, but
I know the nonfiction book could be a payday. We've talked about this.
it would be a 1-to-1 transfer
Yeah.
from the audience that you have now that trusts you to the audience you would want to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if you write a novel, the audience that you have now is not trusting you to write sex scenes in middle-class Connecticut. They aren't trusting you to do that at all. Who in their right mind would trust you to do that?
I'm actually such a prude. I could never write a sex scene. It would be so hard for me. I'd feel so uncomfortable.
You're not missing anything.
But yeah, yeah, I understand this is not the smartest career move, right? But what happened was that I felt good while I was writing the novel, and I didn't feel good while I was writing the nonfiction book. And like I said here, I've learned to trust my gut more as a creator.
Yes.
Not thinking that it's infallible, but to just go with like, if I for some reason something feels unsettling about something I'm doing or saying, then you should stop saying it. Yeah,
It's
or
not
stop doing it.
infallible, no, but it is right next door to something that is. I mean, yes, you weren't feeling right when you were writing the nonfiction, but Steve was feeling right when you were writing the nonfiction.
Of course.
Where's our priorities here? What you feel or what's pleasing Steve?
Yeah. Was Steve mostly pleased by the idea that I could get a big payday and I could finally retire to I could get a cottage in Connecticut, and then of all the states, actually, that would not be the one. I'm never going back to Connecticut. It was a fine place to live for a few years, but but I could get my cottage somewhere that doesn't go to 100 degrees for 60 days out of the year. And
it's got to be the absolute dream of anybody in Texas.
Yeah.
I'll go anywhere where it doesn't get to 100 degrees and stay there for all of June, all of July, and all of August.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always wanted to move to Maine. It's bleak for a few months out of the year, but it's very beautiful in the summer and spring, right?
By 2030, it will not be bleak for a few months out of the year.
Yeah,
it will not have any winters.
Yeah.
So all that you'll have to worry about there will be deer ticks and white supremacists. Maine has millions of both.
I think they make sprays.
That would be great. Wouldn't that be great? Oh man. I wouldn't so much for white supremacists. I wouldn't want a spray that repels them. I'd want a spray that identifies them. I'd want just a little can so I could just whisk people on the subway, and if they turn purple or maybe orange, orange would be the better word, then I know what they are, whether they admit it or not. But okay, to wrap up what was supposed to be our topic, I could go on forever about this YouTube business, because this is a new realization for me as well, comparatively new. 2 years ago, if you had said all the things you just said to me about YouTube, I would have been smirking the whole time and calling you a sellout, until it finally got through my thick head that there are two ways to do this. Mm-hmm. One is conversational and throwaway, essentially throwaway. And the other is craft. I'm making this not as a conversation, but as a resource.
Mhm.
And those are both completely viable. I didn't realize that for the longest time, even though I've enjoyed a lot of that kind of YouTube. I just
Yeah, yeah.
that all struck me as inauthentic, and now I know it's not. So I
The
can,
well, the book genre of YouTube is heavily slanted towards the first type, that very conversational type,
yeah,
heavily. Whereas like film YouTube is not like that. Film
no,
YouTube is like, and so when people have asked me the kind of what I'm trying to do in the future, what I say is I want to talk about books and philosophy as if I were a film YouTuber. Like that's probably the best way to put it there, in the
only
sense
without being
of,
a raging a hole.
well, yeah, yeah, but in the sense of like I can get someone to watch for 25 minutes and talk. Like there's one film YouTuber, sorry to keep going back, guy named Thomas Flight. Have you ever watched his stuff? You probably dislike him because he thinks directors are important, but
They all do.
he but for instance, he did this great video on like why Andor feels real, and it was about the
Yes,
set design in Andor. I've never
yes,
watched Andor. I have no interest in more Star Wars content. I just am bored
Andor's
by the
terrific,
whole thing.
absolutely
And
terrific.
um,
That
that's another one
video,
of those things. That video is astounding, and
yeah,
a lot of his videos are astounding like that because that's a guy who understands storytelling. Like he's not just like mad about movies. He actually understands storytelling, and he's going to tell a story while explaining how a director tells a story, or use
yes.
it, or some set designer tells the story. And I think that
Still very much
ability
the
to,
raging a hole vibe. Still very much.
oh, I
His
like the,
videos are extremely well written. They're extremely
yeah.
well crafted. They're extremely well thought out. And I'm sure he has slapped a child. So you've got both. You've got the
Yeah,
both
yeah.
elements going on there.
So you've but anyway, just like looking at all of it, I just view it as like, yeah, I want to do that stuff that other people on YouTube have proven is possible. And then my next step is how do I do it better than them? I'm not at the point where I can do it as well as them, but then the point is there.
Well, the
Not even
needle
in a
that
sense
you're
of,
trying to thread is harder than a
probably
lot of the people that you're mentioning because you are not going to surrender your authenticity.
that's a big part of it. Yeah.
The big road, the broad open road to getting successful at doing the kind of presentation video you're talking about is to surrender your authenticity.
Yeah.
Since
Yeah.
you're not going to do that, there are only a handful of people that
Yeah.
make the
And
kind of video you're talking about who are still themselves, who are still
there
obviously real
yeah.
people.
There are a few times on YouTube where I've made a video where I look back at it and don't feel good about it, and they like haunt me, and where I wish I hadn't made them in the first place, and I never want to feel that again. So I would like to, yeah, that's a crucial part of what I'm trying to do in the future.
So should we at least toss in a closing reference to our subject, to the subject of
Yes.
of, of timid readers?
Yeah, yeah.
So it sounds to me on that subject like we have boiled down things to what we started with, which is that timid readers are usually constrained by time and I guess we could call it egotism. They don't want to feel like just a raw flopping beginner.
Mm. Yeah, maybe a little bit like that. I don't know if I'd say egotism, but something close to that. They like the sense of familiarity, right? So it's time and sort of a real preference for familiarity.
So with let's say the famously siloed booktube fantasy community.
Mm-hmm.
They don't deal with the rest of booktube. They don't interact with the rest of booktube. They don't acknowledge the existence of the rest of booktube, except for a few ambassadors. There are a few people from general booktube who can cross the border, but otherwise, no.
Mm-hmm.
You're in communication with some of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you've said you want to recommend to them stuff that is not fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So what tactics would you use?
What I would
Would
try
you
to say
recommend
is like,
something that's close to what they like?
so the first step is probably to see if they're willing to read science fiction, because you can sort of like nudge them a little bit. I think it makes a lot of sense that like the brothers Gwyn do this a lot, where they're like, you should read historical fiction. So read like Boudica or something, because it's going to scratch a lot of the same itches for you as well.
They're right about
Um,
that. They're entirely
yeah,
right
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah, exactly. You don't
that. They're
need
wrong about Cormac McCarthy, but they're
you
right
don't
about
you don't need a wizard, right? Necessarily to like the same thing. A lot of
yeah.
the people who are interested in these fantasy novels, anyways, they like the sense of like depth of history and like the sense of reality to the world. And you know what has a really long history and feels very real? The world we live in.
No, they
and
do a
so
really good job of that. That
and
is
so
a
that's
natural. Okay, so science
yeah.
fiction and historical fiction, those are two
And then you sort of nudge them a little bit further, and then there might be some classics that you want to start recommending a little bit more, that you say, look, if you like this. And then there are those people who believe, like, there's no reason, if you like science fiction and you like classics, why haven't you read H.G. Wells or Jules Verne? Because it's going to at least kind of get you nudging there. And then why don't you read some of their contemporaries that they would have read, right? And then you start thinking a little bit broader or something. I think you just have to kind of narrowly or gradually expand your set of preferences. It's probably in the same way as like someone who really likes certain kinds of food and they are not a very adventurous eater. You don't take them to like the spiciest Chinese place if all they want to do is eat hamburgers, but you kind of convince them, like, there's some Italian food that's very carb heavy and tomato heavy and you might like it, and it's got a lot of cheese. So, and then you show them this, and then you kind of nudge them a little bit further to show them like what a lighter Italian, you kind of can nudge them there, and you just, they learn that they actually like a lot more than what they thought they would like.
So you don't take them first to a Soho spot for mentholated cubes of raw soy.
No. And you don't take them to, as much as I love like a hot pot place or something like that, you have to make your own dips and you got to boil all the stuff in this boiling vat of fat that is in front of you and things. If you're not interested in that, then like you're just going to kind of scare them. My family is like this. None of my family are very adventurous eaters. They all are just telling me what they don't like. And I became a very adventurous eater at some point. And then like when my wife and I would travel to China, she'd be like, her parents would just be like, eat this. And I'd be like, okay, I didn't even ask what it was first. I would just eat it. And, sometimes sometimes you realize there was things you don't like. And I can't stand durian. It's just like a fruit that I cannot stand. And my Chinese in-laws think I'm crazy for this fact, but I just have to draw a line somewhere. Durian and stinky tofu. Those are the two things. But like other Chinese food that I never thought I would like in the first place, I actually really liked. But I had to sort of take the leap. But getting myself to the point where I felt a little more comfortable each time taking the leap. That's
the only food I ever drew the line at when I was traveling was dog.
Okay, yeah, I also would not.
It's just a hard
too much of an emotional an emotional attachment for me. I love dogs too much.
So this has been a very long conversation. I want to do this tomorrow and the day after that. I know the little baby won't allow that, but I want to. No. But to finish off here, I'm just curious to know: do you have any idea what the next branching out you will do when it comes to books?
Well, because
of that book on Chinese philosophy,
the book on Chinese thought is probably a big one for me. One of the things that I'm working on, because to reference an earlier book that you are an author that I want to profile on my channel at some point, whose name I won't name because I want to keep a little bit of mystery on my future content. He, in addition to being a very good science fiction writer, has written a lot of stuff on like a lot of nonfiction, a lot of history of sort of like the Soho writing scene at times, but also like a lot of stuff about like gay history in the city and things like this. And that stuff I've never really read, or kind of the theory stuff behind that I feel like I need to read if I want to talk about his work. And so this is one way I'm using it. I'm using these authors as like a way to go and read more. Now, when I read Le Guin and then I have to go read a lot more anarchism stuff, that's already in my wheelhouse, right? I've already read a lot of stuff because I fell in love with Le Guin, but I have to read more of it, and I have to kind of really dig into the differences in like those kind of thinkers, and like with the other people like that, that's helping a lot. So it's like what I'm going to do is maybe turn some of the content that I want to make into an opportunity to also slightly expand my horizons, because like so many people, if they're like, I want to talk about Le Guin, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read The Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, and like Earthsea, and I'm going to make a video about how much I like those three books. Yes. And I want to say Le Guin occupies a place in new wave science fiction that's motivated by history. That's like there are theoretical considerations. She wrote nonfiction where she tried to explain her work, so you should read some of that. You should read those novels set in a fictional Eastern European country. You should read her poetry. You should like dive into those and then make a really great analysis video. That's the kind of thing. And I'm using that as an excuse to read that stuff and then read secondary sources that might not be about Le Guin, but give context to her time and place.
Fantastic. That sounds a lot more inviting than my own case. The next example that I will be this afternoon. It'll be a review. It'll be for money, but it's about the history of handicapped access in buildings.
Oh, that sounds fascinating, actually. That actually sounds
theoretically fascinating. I know nothing about it at all. Nothing whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I know only what I know from paltry firsthand experience. I know that when I was small, there was none.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's all I know. Is
And
that
you're
this
out of luck.
this
Yeah,
the
yeah,
history
yeah,
of this subject has happened in the last 70 years.
yeah,
That,
yeah.
so
That's interesting.
not as
One other subject that I've been getting into, but in a way it's motivated by my interest in YouTube, but in a different way, is I've been reading more art and design books to try to understand why things look good and why they don't. Now, the problem is that those art and design books are some of the most pretentious pieces of work that you've ever read, and I say this as a guy who reads philosophy, but occasionally you will come up with someone who is like, I am going to explain to you why here is the ratio for kerning that works for titles. Like, and you say, cool, thank you. You've broken down the formula, and now I understand why some things feel pleasing to the eye and why some things don't. And so reading some more of those has been really interesting too. As someone who never thought I would be doing stuff in a visual medium, I always thought I would only be working with just words, and then realizing that on YouTube, it's words, but it's also the visual medium. So now I have to understand it.
Oh my. Well, so we can pinky promise to do this again?
We'll do this again soon. We'll do it. Yeah.
I've taken up a lot of your baby time, but
You have.
even in this conversation, we have raised half a dozen subjects that I want to pursue, plus the couple that we didn't talk about, the couple that we ruled out ahead of time. As soon as you feel
I can't wait to explain to you why the earth is flat. Yes.
I know. We should have a long conversation about that subject. Talk about a resource. People would watch that thing in droves.
Of course. Yes.
Specifically because we're looking at the whole of the phenomenon and what it is and what it means. Oh.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I know you have a lingering interest in conspiracy theories, not as someone who believes the conspiracy theories, but sort of the conspiracy theory mindset or something like this. You know,
the process of it, I think, is absolutely fascinating.
And I find this fascinating too. I've been obsessed with reading. You know, I was growing up when Wikipedia was emerging, and you could find whole articles on weird conspiracy theories. And as like a teenager, I never believed any of them, right? But I just wanted to read about them. I thought it was so fascinating to understand this weird culture that could emerge. So it's another one of these weird, like, you know, these niche interests that you have, or that I have, that apparently we both.
Yeah,
share.
it's not niche anymore though.
It's now mainstream to actually. It's now mainstream to believe them, right? But
it's mainstream for your governing body to believe it.
Yeah.
Your governor, your state senators, they believe these things. They believe QAnon. The world, the Western world, the United States, is completely ruled by a conspiracy theory, for which, unlike lots of other conspiracy theories, there is nothing like any kind of even remote verification. Nothing at all. Nothing even arguable.
There is a sense of living in a fantasy novel when you live in Texas. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'll bet. More than ever. Yeah, more than ever in Texas. More than in Texas and more than anywhere except maybe Florida. Yeah. Where you are living in a horrible fantasy novel, not the good kind. The horrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll talk about all that next time.
All right, excellent.
Yes.
We'll do. We'll talk about at least some of it. Let's put it that way.
Thank you for listening, BookTube. Good Lord.